Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to week number 3. I thought I'd make a really quick video this week. As you know, I'm traveling this week, but I did want to just thank you for all your work in week 2 and to remind you that I will get to grading your assignments from week 2, both the written assignment as well as the multimedia post, as soon as I possibly can. I anticipate no later than Tuesday and should have all those grades ready and back to you. As last week, as we had discussed, we had a couple of primary topics, one market failures, and the other primary topic was the difference between public and private sector goods. And I thought it might be useful here, just as a recap, to cover a little bit more information on the difference between public and private sector goods, and to add a little bit more nuance to that discussion as well. And then that will serve as a good segue then into introducing the primary topics for this week in week number 3. So last week in week number 2, one of your primary assignments was to, in your written assignment, to identify a public good and a private good, and then discuss the differences between those two goods and some of the different characteristics that a public good may have versus the characteristics of a private good. Now, that really presented this idea of public versus private goods as very much as a binary, dichotomous type of choice. It's either public or it is private. But as we know, that's not necessarily the case. That we really need to look at public and private goods on a spectrum, where on one end of the spectrum you have pure public goods like national defense that are non-exhaustive and non-excludable, that you cannot charge people for the benefits that they are getting from that good. Then on the other side of the equation, the other side of the spectrum, you have your pure private goods. Those are excludable and those are exhaustive. And that people tend to be rivals whenever they compete for the benefits from that pure private good. And there's a finite quantity, a finite amount of those pure private goods. But those are only the ends of the spectrum. In between pure public and pure private goods, we also have other types of goods that kind of live in that gray area. Things such as toll goods and what I like to call common pool goods. Toll goods I consider to be goods like a toll road, where it is excludable in that you can charge people, and if people do not pay the requisite charge, then they are not permitted to get the benefits of that good. So if you think about a very simple toll road, you pull up to the toll road, there is an arm that is across the road that keeps you from driving on the toll road until you pay the toll. You pay the toll, up goes the arm, you then drive on the toll road. The person behind you pays the toll, up goes the arm, they get to drive on the toll road as well. So it is excludable because if you don't pay the toll, the arm doesn't go up, you don't get to use the toll road. But it's considered to be primarily non-exhaustive because everyone who pays the toll then gets to drive on the road. Now, granted, you may have to wait for me to get out of your way and there may be congestion on the road, but at least in theory, if you've paid the toll, you get to extract the benefits from paying that toll. So it tends to be excludable and tends to be non-exhaustive. And that's what we consider to be kind of a toll good. So it's got partly a public good component to it and partly a private good component. Then in that gray area as well, you have other types of goods that exist. And one type of good I like to refer to as a common pool good. So a common pool good would be just the opposite of a toll good. So toll goods are excludable, but they are non-exhaustive. So common pool goods would be non-excludable, but exhaustive in nature. And we don't have a lot of great examples of true common pool goods. I think probably one of the better examples of a common pool good might be mineral resources or something like that, whereby in theory everyone in society should have access to those resources, but they're natural resources, and once they are used up, they're gone, and there are no more of those natural resources to be able to use. So they tend to be non-excludable, but they do tend to be exhaustive. And so I just like to add that kind of nuance to it so that we can not look at public versus private goods as being just this duality, but rather it's a spectrum. And there are gradations of quote-unquote publicness or quote-unquote privateness in terms of the type of good. So it kind of complicates our consideration of what type of good it is to then help dictate, like we did in week one, just how involved government should be. And you kind of see how all this fits together. That if you consider a good to be more public than private in nature, you will probably tolerate more government intervention in the provision or production of that good. If you consider something to be more private sector in nature, then you would rather leave provision and production to the private sector rather than having government intervene. If you look at a good that's a toll or a common pool good, well, then it really does depend. It depends on how public it is versus how private it is in terms of dictating the proper role of government in intervening in provision and production and intervening in the economy. So it kind of builds very nicely from week one to week two. Government intervention is dictated by the type of good that is being provided and produced, which then builds nicely into week number three. And so we'll take that information that we covered in week two on types of goods. And one of the main topics I really want to emphasize briefly in this video from week number three is the idea of externalities. And again, externalities can recommend for us a role for government to play in provision and production of goods. Now, as you'll see from your reading in week three, externalities tend to be these unintended consequences. And so we are trying to produce a widget, as the economists like to talk about. We've got a widget factory, and our widget factory is located up on a hill. And there's a beautiful river that runs behind that hill. And in the production of that widget, we end up polluting the river that runs behind our factory. We did not intend to pollute that river. That was not what we were trying to do. We were merely trying to create the highest quality widget we possibly could to meet the demands of our consumers. But in doing so, we polluted the river. That's a negative externality. The problem with negative externalities is obviously someone needs to clean those up. And typically negative externalities, we think of pollution. We think of impacts on the environment. And so someone needs to clean it up. There is no fiscal incentive for corporations to clean up those negative externalities beyond just trying to be altruistic and just beyond just trying to be a good neighbor. But other than that, you don't really have any hard fiscal incentives to clean up that negative externality. And so that then recommends for some role for government in terms of governmental regulation. Now, conversely, you can have what we consider to be positive externalities. And so you can have unintended consequences that are actually good for society. And so if you think about maybe a low-income healthcare program, healthcare program that's targeted to families below a certain income threshold. Well, it's those lower income families who are going to benefit directly from that healthcare program. But if those folks are healthier and they have healthier children because of this healthcare program, then the positive benefits of that will trickle out to society. And so maybe the entire community will benefit somehow because those children are healthier. And so perhaps they don't, there won't be as much transmission of disease or whatever the case may be, or even workers will be healthier. And so perhaps there'll be fewer missed days of work and productivity levels will go up. So there are some positive externalities, some positive consequences of having this healthcare program for lower income households. Now, the problem with positive versus negative externalities is it's kind of counterintuitive in that negative externalities, the goods that produce negative externalities, tend to be overproduced. We tend to produce more of those goods than we normally would because there is no inherent mechanism to charge those corporations that are causing those negative externalities. So there's no incentive for them to stop the negative externalities, and so you tend to have goods that result in negative externalities being overproduced. Conversely, goods that create positive externalities tend to be underproduced. And they tend to be underproduced because when you are a corporation and you are considering how much to produce. As you know from your reading, you're going to make that determination of the amount of supply that you are going to create based upon the amount of demand that there is. So supply and demand will create your price point. Demand will also dictate the amount of the supply that you create. Well, if you've got these positive externalities where you have people in society who are benefiting from this good, but they are not necessarily paying for the good, then those people who are benefiting are, as the text talks about, free riders. Those free riders and their preferences do not find their way into the decision-making of a corporation in terms of deciding how much to produce. The corporation will gauge demand based upon paying customers. So those consumers who are actually paying for the good, the number of those customers, that will then be the measure of demand for most corporations. However, you may have a much greater demand than that because all of these folks who are free riders who are not purchasing the good are still getting a benefit. And so you only make enough, you only build enough supply and inventory to meet the demand of paying customers, despite the fact that you have all these other folks who are also benefiting from the good. And so goods that result in positive externalities tend to be underproduced. So goods that result in negative externalities are overproduced. Goods that result in positive externalities tend to be underproduced. So both of those things, negative as well as positive externalities, could suggest for us a role for government in terms of reducing the production of goods that create negative externalities and enhancing the production of goods that create positive externalities. And so even this discussion of positive and negative externalities also will help us answer the first question we started out the class with in the very first week, which is, what is the proper role of government in the economy? So as you go through this week and you work on your discussion board assignment and your written assignment, the one area that I really want us to focus on is the issue of externalities and how government gets involved in regulating these externalities for the purposes of equity as well as economic efficiency. So I look forward to reading your discussion board as well as your written assignment for this week. And again, I will get to the grading of your week 2 assignments as quickly as I can, as soon as I get back into town. So I do wish you all a great week and a blessed week, and look forward to working with you as soon as I get back in town. Take care.